our last conversation with Professor Nishimura, we talked about cancer immunology. We just touched upon the topic of vaccination. And since we talked a little bit about the vaccines, I would like to focus more on the cervical cancer and the human papillomavirus. When we last seen each other, we talked a little bit about cancer immunology, and we touched upon the vaccine that is devoted to fight against cervical cancer, namely cervical cancer, but there are also other cancers that are caused by the human papillomavirus. Can you tell us a little bit more? Why is it so important to be aware of that vaccine?
Well, because this virus is very potent at causing malignancies. I mean, it doesn't happen in every patient that's infected with the virus, but it is the causative agent for many of the cervical cancers. The highest, it's 95 or higher percent of cervical cancers are HPV positive. There are very potent oncogenes, cancer-causing genes, that are in the HPV virus that can lead to these cancers. So by preventing the infection with the virus, you're preventing the person from developing those cancers. And depending upon the population, I've reviewed some grants and some things for HPV, and certain populations in the inner cities in the United States, you know, by the time a young girl has had 2 sexual contacts, she had greater than 50% of being infected with the virus. And in some cases, those girls were 13 or 14. And so if you're able to vaccinate against it and prevent those infections, then down the road, you reduce, I mean, they wouldn't have the HPV-associated cervical cancer or any of the other malignancies associated with HPV.
So let's debunk some myths. We in Poland sometimes think that we should only vaccinate women or young girls because cervical cancer is all about women, and then the human papillomavirus was thought to be only associated with women. But it's not true.
So there are 2 things. First of all, where do you think the girls get it? Right? You get it from the boys. Right. And second, there are penile cancers that can come about from the human papillomavirus. And so the virus has seemed to be very safe. I mean, they've vaccinated millions of patients over the years, and you don't see serious side effects from it. And so, you know, the boys harbor the virus as well. And so there's no reason not to vaccinate, you know. Especially in fairly poor countries where the health care, you know, when you get cancer, it's difficult to treat because the health care is a problem.
Yes, and speaking of the health system, well, in Poland we have 2 vaccines as of now, as I can think, that are available for vaccination. One is the one that you've mentioned, Gardasil, and they differ, because one of them is 9-valent vaccination and the other one is 2-valent. Why is it so different?
There are many, many different variants of the human papillomavirus, and not all of them are cancer-causing. So the early versions of Gardasil took the most common ones, the ones that are most prevalent in the population, and immunized against that. And then after they showed those were effective, they start adding new variants to it, the less common ones. Because if you're vaccinated against, you know, HPV 16, but you happen to be exposed to a different one, you may not have immunity against it. And so by adding more variants to it, they can show that they still maintain effectiveness while at the same time that they're safe and they can cover more variants of the virus.
Would it be fair to say that the vaccine that is of less variants is less effective?
No, it's not that they're less effective. They're not as effective against variants that are not covered by the vaccine, right? It's like COVID. You know, we've altered the COVID vaccines because as new variants come out, you add to it so that you can protect against that strain. It's the same thing. You just start with the most common ones. So if the highest percentage of the virus in the population is HPV 16, then that's what you want, and you don't want to start with one of the other ones. You want to start with the ones that are most common so you can protect the most patients.
So if I'm a patient that can be found in the Polish health system and I have to choose between the 2-variant or a 9-variant vaccination, what would your advice be?
Against the same target?
HPV.
Against HPV? I mean, I would go for the 9, for the broader one that gives you the most coverage.
Don't be alone, be well informed. My final question would be, what would you say to those people, patients that are very reluctant to being vaccinated?
I tend to think people should make decisions for themselves. I think that, some decisions, you may later learn to regret. And I think you should talk to the doctors and read about the side effects and read about the effectiveness of these vaccines and make an informed decision. But the field seems to show, and the data shows, that a vaccination against HPV is effective at preventing productive HPV infections. And so not only would you prevent yourself from getting the infection and potentially the malignancies associated with it, but you also would reduce spreading it around.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about that group immunity that we kind of create when we have more people that are vaccinated? How does it work?
Well, the more people that are vaccinated, then they won't contract the virus and they won't be able to spread it, right? So if you or I don't have the virus, I can't give it to somebody else. I say this all the time. One of the problems we had was that the government told you, you have to do this, you have to do this, and they didn't explain to the population about the vaccine. Because when COVID first started, everybody said, well, it would take 2 years to develop a vaccine. And 10 months later, the FDA approved the Moderna vaccine for emergency authorized use. And the government said, you will take this or you won't work, you won't fly, you'll stay at home, right? What they didn't tell people is they had vaccinated 30,000 people with that vaccine, and they had 6 months follow-up. They knew the side effects of this vaccine. And they didn't bother to go out and tell the population, this is the safety data, this is what we know about this, this is what, they just said, no, you're going to do it. And most people, when you tell them that they're going to do something, they're going to tell you no. And so if you treat people like adults, you treat them like intelligent people, and you explain it to them and you can show them the numbers, people will make informed decisions. If you educate people properly and tell them the risks and the benefits, especially the benefits, most people will pick the benefits.
And I hope that this talk will help you make informed decisions and be safe. Thank you once again, Professor.
You're quite welcome.
It was a great pleasure to have you on my channel.
It's my pleasure to be here.